Welcome, everybody, to SuperCritical, the podcast that makes deep tech simple. It's your host, Luigi Di Piazza. Today, we're joined by Talia Rafaeli, a partner at KOMPAS VC, a European venture capital fund backing companies innovating across manufacturing and the built environment. Before co-founding KOMPAS VC, Talia led investments on behalf of Porsche Ventures, focusing on deep tech opportunities in mobility, innovation, software architecture, and emerging automotive technologies. Talia, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Luigi. Happy to be here.
Great to have you. So I would love to take you back to the moment you decided to start KOMPAS. What gap in the market did you see that was not filled by existing players, and you had the idea to start this firm with your co-founders?
Yeah, I would say that our idea behind starting KOMPAS, the idea was kind of born in 2020. We actually launched the fund in 2021. Really started from two, main observations. I would say that the main industries that we focus on as a fund, so we're pretty much a focused fund, industrial tech. We focus on three main industries, and there was an understanding that these three industries, and industry in general, was responsible for a tremendous proportion of greenhouse gases and dangerous emissions, and that we were witnessing the emergence of a lot of technologies that we're tackling. So it came from a place of responsibility, but also understanding opportunity. And if you recall, back in 2020, 2021, there was this surge in, I would say, what's called, urgency around things like net zero and taming the carbon emissions of heavy industries. And so that was, I would say, part of our mission. And I would say another one was that we had noticed that working in manufacturing industries, that industrial and physical world systems were more and more becoming software defined. But venture capital, as an industry, as an area that attracted so many talented individuals, was really, really optimizing and continuing to optimize for digital first businesses. So becoming aware that this deep tech asset class was getting strong tailwind support also from governments and from regulations really allowed us to converge, our understanding and experience in venture capital and really taking on this opportunity. And you also had these amazing founders, oftentimes serial founders, that were optimizing and building for these sectors because they were building with purpose, right? So they were looking at energy and manufacturing and logistics and chemicals. And they were really looking to tackle hard problems that had longer cycles and required bigger outcomes and often a lot of capital expenditures. But there was this void in investors who truly understand what these constraints meant and had that patience to take that on. So they really needed a specialist partner, which is what we were trying to build, that had that industrial context. So it's patience and credibility. But I would say that was kind of our main driver.
About the KOMPAS platform and kind of like the networks of industrial partners that you've collected allow you to have like kind of that like specialist approach to the vertical.
So we are backed by a very strong cornerstone investor, but beyond our LPs, we bring with us a very wide, I would say, industry network. Whether it's from our, we spent a combined 15 years in the manufacturing industry in Europe, and this comes together with a long value chain, anywhere from providers of raw materials all the way to the suppliers, all the way to the end customers, and these are very large manufacturing companies. Together with that, we are supported by large industrial families in Northern Europe. We are headquartered in Denmark, so there's very strong Danish industry angle as well in the built environment and manufacturing. One of the leads of our platform team used to run the net zero program for the World Green Building Council, So when it comes to the built environment, she brings an enormous amount of strong, network players in real estate and construction. So what we try to do in every investment we make, we bring these strong industrial partners to the table, oftentimes making these introductions. They can then become either initial pilot customers or first commercial partners. And on the other hand, they can also help us with our due diligence, right? Because ultimately, if they are the end customer, potentially, they can also have a very strong understanding of the technology. So we depend and boast this strong industry network as something that we bring to the table and to every single one of our portfolio companies.
As mentioned earlier, you invest pretty much globally, or at least in most of the most advanced economies. And and geographies while maintaining these deep roots within the European industrial networks. Can you explain how does this proximity to these networks allow you to win these deals? And also kind of what are US or Israeli companies looking for in European partners, be it both the investor side as well as the, let's say, corporate side?
I would say the advantage of being a European, financial entity in terms of, what our firm is that we're very close to, the core of the European, industrial heart. Europe, as you know, by history, has a historical advantage in industrial depth and breadth, and I would say probably the greatest when it comes to pure excellence. Europe still operates much of the world's most complex factories, utility infrastructure, very, very deep-rooted supply chains. And I think that for us, being close to these players and being close to these operators, also having come ourselves from these large value chains of manufacturing and supply chains, and knowing firsthand how they work, and who the entities involved are, all the way from, the core materials all the way through, the cars that we drive and the heat pumps that we install in our homes, gives us really great insight, not only to the pain points that these companies themselves are undergoing, but what are the solutions that we can use to tackle a lot of their core issues, anywhere from, all of the changes that we've seen, with the geopolitical shifts, all the way to changes in regulation, labor shortages, which is a huge problem for a lot of these players. We are very close to the core of the problem, so we can also find a lot of these solutions. So when it comes to kind of on both sides of the coin, our industrial partners looking for technological solutions, but also the founders that we work with around the world, they want access to these really great European players, right? They are some of the strongest brand names in the areas that they excel in. So that is, I think, something that we bring to the table. And anybody who is in kind of these core industries that we are involved in understands the strength of the European industries and the European players.
Absolutely. And as mentioned, you started the fund in 2021. I feel over the last few years, industrial tech, deep tech has gained a lot of momentum and traction. I wonder, how do you think about, gaining and building conviction in partnering one of these founders in this space as it's becoming a bit more mainstream?
I think conviction is something that you build over time. The more that you spend in a certain industry and understand what good is, what excellence is, it allows you to build that conviction quicker. And it's never really about being early. It's about being at the right time for the right reasons, right? Because in deep tech, you need a lot of things, right? You need technical truth, you need customer pull, and you need to really understand that the founders that you have in front of you have the resilience to align no matter what the market throws at them. And in general, I think what we've seen over the last 5 years since we founded the fund, you saw tremendous amount of capital and excitement and attention going to the space. And then it became relatively crowded. It got really hyped. But then, like any cycle, when things change or, there is a realization that this is still deep tech and it is still really hard, doesn't matter how much tailwinds you have from regulation will shift, governments will change. And so you really need to understand other things beyond, the top line growth and the excitement. You need to understand what's called second order risks, right? Things that often investors overlook. So the challenges around, technological integration in deep tech, what unit economics and how important they are when you're investing in a technology, right? It doesn't matter how much, regulation is driving, the customer pull. You still need really strong margins. And if not in the beginning, you need to find out how you get there with economies of scale. You need to understand deployment friction and how to overcome that. So I think conviction is one thing, but conviction needs to come together with a lot of stars that need to align in a number of areas. And that's why when you have a specialist investor who understands these things, it's much easier to work with them.
Is there an example of a company that you've relied on that specialist insight that allowed you maybe to go beyond maybe the doubts of someone who's not as seasoned in this sector, that actually allowed you to better underwrite the risks of a specific company and actually lean early or earlier than others?
Yes, I think every single one of the companies that we've invested in, whether it's deep tech or whether it's even AI for this, for manufacturing and for supply chain, I would say requires a lot of deep industrial understanding. I think that having come from the depth of innovation within manufacturing, we understood a lot of things and trends where the industry was going, and also where regulation was going to take a lot of these industries. And I think that's been a big pull for us in some of the areas that we've underwritten. I'll give you an example of one of our software companies. Actually, is called Prewave. It's based in Vienna, Austria. And they focus on supply chain risk monitoring. So understanding future risks of, anywhere from, your closest supplier all the way through what's called tier N. So it can be not tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, but your farthest supplier, but still you are dependent on that. Understanding where regulation was going around supply chains, particularly in certain geographies within Europe. So it started in Germany, went on to areas around France and the Netherlands and Norway, and then expanded to pan-European. And now there's also international, trends in that as well. Knowing the risks around the Russia-Ukraine crisis and how geopolitical shifts were going to affect, major European manufacturers. And so we made a very early bet in this company because we understood the potential of what this risk monitoring could do for suppliers, and how this could completely change, how dependent and how vulnerable some of the largest, enterprises that have, these supply chains can be, up to, 200,000 suppliers for anywhere from the smallest bolt all the way through cables. And if one thing goes wrong, in the supply chain, it could mean so many different things like delays, recalls, and that can cost billions ultimately for these players. So we knew early on what this could ultimately mean in the next 5 years, and 5 years beyond that. So we made a very early bet back in 2022. The company was barely making any revenue, just a little bit over $1 million. And the company has scaled exceptionally well. And I think us knowing and being very familiar with, their area of expertise and the markets that they were focusing on, and what geopolitical shifts could potentially upend so much of, the stability of some of the largest manufacturers, was the reason we were able to have that conviction very early on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually thinking about Prewave, what convinced you about the founding team that they were the right people to actually scale and tackle and dominate such a complex and multifaceted challenge as global supply chains are?
So you can never really be, I think that's the interesting thing with venture. So you meet the teams very early on. Oftentimes they're just getting started. They have the product. If they have already, a few recurring revenue partners, that's great. Sometimes they only have POCs. Sometimes they have, initial, I think for me, there was that understanding, as what I mentioned before, the playing field that they were active in. But I met the technical co-founder. So she basically had this vision when she was studying her PhD at the Technical University of Vienna, that supply chains were going to be more and more vulnerable as time went on, but there were signals that you could pick up on, not from publicly available information, but from other areas, from local chatter, discussion, social media, signals that you can pick up on and use to understand a lot more than what, with the information that we have available. And so she used this thesis to build Prewave, and that was the core. And when I met with her, I met someone with a tremendous amount of conviction and passion. She had a different approach, given her PhD and given the years that she had worked on it, and understanding how you can get, new signals and new information to make, very lucrative and monumental decisions. And I just believed in her. I met her co-founder. We understood the value of, to the market, but they had tremendous dynamics. These are two individuals who had, knew each other from a very early age. They had a wonderful relationship. They brought very, very different things that were very complementary to the table in terms of their skills and their talents. And they had this, drive. You could tell this passion in their eyes that they were going to do this. And they believed that they were going to build a category leading company. And that, for me, with a little bit of, commercial indications as well from some of the commercial partners that they had already established, that was probably everything I needed to know about these two founders. And and then you're essentially making a bet on what you feel, because a lot of times it's a gut feeling that these two were going to be able to pull it off.
Looking back at your track record, is there a company investment that has shaped more than others the way you think about investing at the earlier stage outside of pre-wave?
Yes, I won't name any names, but I think all of us, again, investing is a journey. It's an educational experience. If you're familiar with the industry, you understand what the statistics are when it comes to companies that ultimately succeed and companies that ultimately fail. It's called venture capital because it's adventurous, right? I think that early on with Compass, I did invest in a team that I went by pure gut instinct on the founders, but I think it was a very, very early investment. And I think it was, I was at this point in the fund where we were just in the beginning of the investment cycle. You have, 10 years plus for companies to mature when you're just setting out with a new fund. And so it was really about taking a bet on one particular co-founder where there were so many other open questions left. But I think I wanted to leave it to serendipity to see what this founder can do. And oftentimes when you're investing very early, you understand that the company that you're investing in from day one is not going to be the company that you're going to ultimately come out with, if the company's still around 7 to 10 years later. So oftentimes you're making a bet on the resilience of the founder or founders to ultimately find that product market fit. But they're smart enough and they have that passion and they have that the drive. And I think that for me, it was not enough data points. If I look back, there was still additional data points, conviction sources that I could have used to make that bet. But hindsight is 2020. So I think you learn as you go along, to have much more information when you're making these investment decisions. Maybe not always go so early, but there are many investors who would say the absolute opposite of what I'm saying right now. It's really about personal style and confidence and conviction on how you make the decisions you make.
Yeah. Is there now like a founder signal, be it behavioral or call it maybe like mindset, that maybe at that start you might have not fully appreciated, but now is such a key moment of like actually making that decision? Be it, replying to emails under 3 hours, and it's like someone who does that consistently is the type of person I want to work with. Is there something that like is a bit more subtle, not as obvious, like someone who's clearly a master of their own domain, but is there something that you now look for in partner founders you want to partner with?
I mean, this can go all the way from trying to understand a founder's resilience. That's the most vague answer. But when it comes to, a very simple answer, I would say things like responsiveness, which are things that I extremely appreciate. So what I found is, again, none of us are expecting the founders to be, on 24/7. But I found the ones that are the most responsive to you as an investor. And obviously, a lot of times these companies have a lot of investors knocking at their doors, especially if, they're in very, sexy fields and very, I would say, even hyped, markets. The way that they interact with you as an investor will ultimately be how they interact with their customers. So if you can gain that confidence in the responsiveness of the founder, so essentially, let's say you're sending them a list of questions for your due diligence process, but it takes them a week to get back to you, then that's not a very good sign. But then again, if you're sending them an email with a question, if they answer you, within a few hours, just like in your question, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not the attention to me that I'm looking for. I'm assessing how they deal with opportunities in general, right? So if an opportunity is falling in their inbox, How quickly do they pick up on them? What is the tone that they use? Because to me, I am a customer as well, right? I am an investor. I'm sitting at the other end of the table, but I am still someone that they need to sell to. And that is, to me, one of the strongest signals that a founder can send.
Yeah. Someone I met said sometimes they make the mental experiment of thinking, how would this person behave in a security line at an airport? Would I get along with this person if we're queuing up and like trying to get through this together? It's such an interesting mental experiment. Sometimes it's like you never learn more about a founder than when you travel with them. So that's it could be very expensive, or in terms of time, especially to do that. But I'm sure that's like a great way to learn.
Yeah, that's one of the most wonderful things about business as you go along. We start off thinking that it's the strength of what we're building and the products and ultimately our deliverables, but early on in the journey, it's really about personal connections and personal relationships and how you treat your peers, and how you get along with people. And ultimately, does somebody want a second conversation? Oftentimes, if you're a complete jerk, that second conversation is not going to come, and that's business ultimately. So I completely agree with you. I think that mental test is extremely important. I like to think that most of the founders that I invest in are people that I would actually like to sit and have a beer with. That's kind of a test that I put everyone in. Obviously, they don't have to become my best friends. That's not that's not the signal I'm looking for. But they need to understand personal relationships, because it's the investors that are going to invest in them. It's the customers that are going to trust them. It's the employees that are going to want to show up for work every day and work with them. They need to be people that others can look up to. I look for a lot of humility in the people that I want to work with. They never can be those who have it all figured out or assume to figure out, or don't like to be asked questions or challenged. So yeah, I mean, I think that's some of the most important characteristic traits that we can ultimately bring to the table as founders.
Absolutely. Talking about this point about humility and not having it all figured out, can you talk to me a little bit about like how do you're a specialist fund, you have a long track record in the industry, you kind of know what the pain points are. How do you remain open to meeting founders that like maybe might bring a different approach that maybe does not meet the prepared mind approach that you might have towards what are the challenges of the industry, or that maybe has subverted a little bit those expectations, or is the field so kind of crystal clear in terms of the opportunities and the challenges that there's no really space for like a different approach to how companies should be built in industrial technology, manufacturing, the built environment?
I mean, as founders, I think it doesn't necessarily matter what industry you're focusing on. You need instinct. Instinct helps you make, good, quick decisions, but you need the humility, because that's ultimately what's going to help you survive. I think that in general, a founder has to trust, a certain level of judgment on direction. When it comes to instinct, they don't have to have everything figured out. They need to have basic understanding. They need to think where a certain industry is going. They don't always have to know what exactly the entire product portfolio is going to look like in the next 5 years. A lot of times you start with one, and you build from there as you go and you learn. A lot of times the earlier for good and for bad help you define the journey that you're going to be on. And so I don't think that I ever found anyone early on that had the entire path kind of completely clear. It's really about having a strong instinct, having humility, exercising good judgment, especially on people that you hire, staying flexible on the path. That's the resilience ultimately, because as I mentioned to you, a company is going to pivot so many times until they find the right product market fit, until they find the right, persona that they're selling to within, even if you figured out the market that you're in, but you haven't, you're supposed to be selling to the VP procurement, but you're really focusing on, the head of operations. It's not the right customer. If you're focusing on industrial tech, especially in our areas, it's reality that's always going to give you a new lesson. You're always going to be learning something new. Founders, I think, they thrive under pressure. And then the question is, when that something breaks, do they get defensive or do they become curious, right? And if they become curious, then that's humility to me, right? It's like, okay, this is not what I thought, but let's try to figure this out, this new path, right? Let's get this new product out. And that to me that's what the best founders are made out of. They surface problems early, and then they invite people along the way to solve the problems, whether it's the people that they are building with or the new customers that they are, that they're focusing on. And investors that can support them along their path. Yeah, that to me is kind of the way I see things and the way I like to work with people.
Looking at the future, how do you think about building a enduring firm? Like, what do you think are the most important challenges that you'll have to navigate along the way within the next 5-10 years?
I think that if I were to look at what endurance means in venture, I think it really comes from clarity of purpose. A lot of times, if you ask investors kind of what is the ultimate goal obviously we all want to build great companies, but it's to have satisfied LPs that will continue supporting you so that you can launch your next fund, you can successfully raise. And of course, that's important. But I think LPs are not just looking for, outsized returns in venture. I think they are really looking for that purpose as well. I would say that we're not trying to be, as a fund, we're not trying to be everything to everyone. I think the challenge for us to build this, long-lasting, enduring firm is to be patient, is to build strong, resilient companies that endure very, very tough, sales cycles and whirlwinds that essentially the real world brings along, while everybody else is looking for something else, right? So you're trying to be the contrarian, but you're trying to be the contrarian that does it right. The world is pushing for faster cycles and louder narratives. We want to be the firm that understands that timing is critical and that patience is often the greatest virtue, because a lot of these, category defining companies are built over time. They're not going to be built overnight. Those are left oftentimes for other industries that, it's a 0 to 1, kind of game. Here, we're working with just like you asked with endurance, right? It's something that we understand will take time. But that's the ultimate goal here, is to really take our time and to build these companies right, and to come out with some of these really strong kind of, companies of the future.
Outside of great financial returns, is there a kind of impact that you wish your decisions will lead to? Sustainable, as we mentioned at the top, there were challenges around just how much these industries are carbon intensive. Is there a metric, or is there something that you wish you're able to impact, and how do you yourself try to make that happen?
We are not, what you would call an Article 9 fund in that respect. We don't use, industry measurements. How many tons of CO2 have I removed from the air, and how much, less of a carbon footprint does so and so company, have as a result of, this or that technology. I would say that our main thesis remains to, decarbonize industry, build resilience, invest in founders that are building this endurance for the industry. Anything around digital transformation of these heavy industries as well. So, I would say ultimately the result is really, in the customer, on the production line, in the manufacturing floor, how the company ultimately reports, their CO2 emissions, and how much have I, as an individual and as a firm, contributed to that by bringing these great innovations to them. It's not something that I would say our LPs expect us to measure or to have, concrete understanding of what impact we have. So we are definitely not an impact fund, but we have that as our, and as our mission statement. If you go into our website, you'll see that that's the jargon we use. We are here to, build resilience and, employ efficiency and decarbonize these heavy industries.
So to kind of wrap up our conversation, I'd love to go through a few quick fire questions. The first one being, what is SuperCritical to you today?
SuperCritical. I think it's become sort of a cliche in the last 2 years or maybe a year, but it's a word that I've brought up a few times here in the past. And that is really, given the state of the world and some geopolitical shifts and, our environment, I think the word is really resilience. That to me is super critical. It's really about building resilient systems, resilient supply chains, and resilient institutions, because that ultimately is what's going to, bring about change. It's the ability to, you know, stand tall in front of any challenge. It's the ability to change when things are completely, upended. It's when, the rug is pulled from under your feet and you're able to, be resilient and chart a new path. So I would say that word to me is probably one of the most super critical things.
And what's a belief you hold now that will look obvious in 5 years, but sounds maybe a bit unreasonable today?
Kind of one of the major tenets that our fund is, the establishment of KOMPAS was based on, which is really around what we believe industrial technologies and the change in, how industrial innovation is going to change. If you look at, where we are today, we think, these industrial companies, these manufacturers, these utilities, these, energy companies, they appear slow moving. They're not adopting new technologies at the same pace as the Oracles and the SAPs of the world. AI transformation is slow. So I think people today are very quick to overlook some of these verticals in terms of, understanding where the opportunity lies. But I think one of my greatest beliefs is that industrial AI is ultimately going to create larger companies than anything we see today in consumer, because ultimately this is what's going to drive real world outcomes.
Hopefully. What's the hardest truth you've learned about building or backing breakthrough technology?
That breakthrough technologies don't fail because they're wrong or they don't work. I think that today we could possibly, as humanity, have at our fingertips more solutions to solve, our biggest problems, both in the near term and the long term. But what we fail at is instigating adoption, which is much harder than expected. And ultimately, the adoption leads to greater risk aversion, because so many of our large enterprises that we require, not only to adopt these technologies, but to finance these technologies, they're so focused on, near-term results and their financial, their quarterly financial statements, and, if they're publicly traded, then what the shareholders need to see, as opposed to, long-term aspirations and what's really important for humanity. So I think that to me is one of the hardest truths, which I hope somehow we'll be able to overcome.
If you could whisper one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Wow, ignore so much of the negativity that comes your way early on. Because if you're doing something contrarian, if you're doing something that doesn't kind of fit with the mold, especially when you're in your early 20s and people kind of understand, okay, these are the cool things and these are the less cool things. But if you're trying to do the less cool thing, but you're really good at it, then you can be that contrarian that really, really succeeds. Try to be less susceptible to all the doubters out there, the ones who kind of give you the negative messaging, and understanding that in the end, they're playing to their insecurities and has nothing to do with you, because they don't understand the journey. They don't understand what's needed to succeed. The play is a long-term game. There is no success overnight. And it's really important to choose depth over speed.
I couldn't add more anything else. So, Talia, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your insights and your wisdom. Listeners, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you so much, Luigi.